Good morning. Our opening words this morning are by Erica Hewitt. Welcome to this morning, to this day, to this opportunity to be together in community, which is a time of joy, of comfort, and sometimes challenges. This Unitarian Universalist congregation is a place where we come to learn more about being human. We're not here because we figured out life's questions or because we think we've got it right. We come here to learn more about being in relationship together, how to listen, how to forgive, how to be vulnerable, how to create trust and compassion for one another. Whether it's your first time in worship with us or your 100th time, we hope you'll find here questions that stretch you, that people to befriend you, and liberal religious ideals and values that challenge you as you join us in loving boldly, living justly, and welcoming radically. And so, just like every week, I want to welcome you with live from Fellowship Hall. It's our LCUUF Sunday service. Now, our announcements were on a slideshow before the service, and if you didn't see them, no worry. We'll be sending those by email in the next day or so. A few notes in particular. You may notice that we will be having a celebration of life for Monica Devine after next week's Sunday service at 12 noon. I hope you will be able to make it. Our building is now open to all participants. We'll continue to offer a service on Zoom, even as we welcome people into the building. So feel free to come down here or stay at home as you prefer. We do ask people to continue to wear masks in the building to better protect those of us who are immunocompromised or who are not yet fully vaccinated here in Mexico. And I think that's it with the announcements.
Good morning. Our chalice lighting words today are from Catherine Esty. Little flame, light the tender kindling of our souls, and soon a roaring blaze shall be of warmth and love and community. From this little spark, may a fire of passion spread from heart to heart and light our way, sweet Spirit, and light our way. Please light your chalice. Our hymn this morning is Mother. Celebration for the life that we share. Our hymn is Mother Spirit, Father Spirit. This hymn is by Norbert Chapek, who created the flower communion that we celebrated 2 weeks ago.
Mother Spirit, Father Spirit, where are you? In the sky song, in the forest sounds you cry. What to give you, what to call you, what am I? Many drops are in the ocean deep and wide. Sunlight bounces off the ripples to the sky. What to give you, what to call you, who am I? I am empty, time flies from me, what is time? Dreams eternal, fears infernal haunt my heart. What to give you, what to call you, oh my God. Mother Spirit, Father Spirit, take our hearts, take our breath and let our voices sing our parts. Take our hands and let us work to shape our art.
Each week, we take time to remind ourselves that we belong to a community which cares for each other. We do this by sharing any significant joys or sorrows in our lives. If you have a joy or sorrow to share today, you can type it into the chat now, and we'll read those aloud. First, let us voice our sorrows or concerns, whatever you or the world may be holding that is in need of our healing and caring thoughts. You are welcome to type sorrows and concerns in the chat box. Okay. We're going to start here first with people in our audience, congregation. Okay.
Are you ready for me online? So we have a concern from Gayla, who says Mary Helen Montgomery fell last Friday and had surgery to repair her hip. She has spoken to Mary on the phone and will visit her soon. Mary sounds cheerful. That's all.
Now let us recall the joys. Whatever you may be celebrating, whatever evokes a feeling of joy or peace for yourself or others, you are welcome to type joys in the chat box. I would like to start off. Our great joy this week was that our daughter from Arlington, Virginia visited us this week, during which time she discovered how truly boring her father and I are. Okay.
I have a joy. This is Michael Reason. This week in the Euro soccer tournament, which is ongoing until today, England beat Denmark to qualify for the final of the Euro Cup, which takes place this afternoon, 2 o'clock time, 8 o'clock in England. And this is the first time that England, go England, have actually been in a European final since 1966.
Whoa.
So I'm extremely happy, and I'll be cheering them on.
We have a joy from Linda Jessen, who says she is very thankful for our UU fellowship in Mexico. We have another joy from Janice Kimball, who says this is her son Terry's 19th visit. Because of COVID, he missed his last biannual visit. Francisco and Janice are especially happy to see him this time and are hanging out together, eating home-cooked meals, and in the evening listening to Mexican music on the Mirador. Life is good. A joy from Liz Mulder. She says, I have a joy that Monica was such a good friend of mine, and I have a sorrow that she is no longer with us. I miss her. Condolences to her family. A joy from me, Colleen Beery. Although it's not fun to have a broken ankle, I'm grateful to my friends here at Lakeside who've been kind and generous with their help. I'm really happy to have found a wonderful dog walker for Teddy, who seems to be very happy here in Mexico. That's all.
And now we light the care candle. This candle from our care team represents those sorrows that are too raw, too difficult for us to share aloud. So many of us have had losses, partners, children, grandchildren, losses that remain present with us every day. So many of us have burdens, anger, fear, and frustration, all those things that weigh heavy on our hearts. We will light this candle for all those unspoken sorrows.
And so I want to invite you into a little time of meditation, just a little time to turn inward, to be with yourself. I invite you to close your eyes, if you like, and get comfortable in your chair, and just be present with yourself for a moment. And if you've done meditation even a little bit, you've probably noticed a few things about it. One thing, of course, is your runaway mind, or at least I have a runaway mind. Most of us do, that we sometimes have to notice and bring back. But the other thing that many of us notice is body discomforts. Oh, maybe we're sitting a little oddly. And especially if we're in a group like this, we don't want to really kind of bring attention to ourselves by adjusting our sitting. Or worse, maybe there's an itch. Maybe an itch arises, like the one that's on the back of my neck right now. What do you do if you're in a group like this? Can you reach up and scratch that itch? Oh, I want to scratch it. Oh. What about just sitting there and noticing it? Oh, I still want to scratch it. And so you have a decision. Do I scratch it? Or do I see where it goes? Either choice is good. If you decide to scratch it, take a moment and notice how good it feels, even as you bring your hand up to reach for it. Notice the feeling before you even get there and scratch it. If you decide not to scratch it, notice what happens. If you're like me, maybe your mind gets carried off in other thoughts, and you realize, oh, where did that itch go? Maybe if you're really good, you stay focused on it and it just disappears on its own. All of these are good. So we'll just take a couple more moments in silence and see what comes up. Blessed be.
Joseph Joubert, who lived from 1754 to 1824, was a French moralist and essayist. He published nothing during his lifetime, but after he died, his widow entrusted his manuscripts, which included many pithy observations, to François-René de Chateaubriand, who published a short selection of them for private circulation. One such observation is, when I see young people such as those of our day, I think that heaven wishes to destroy the world. 200 years ago, and many of us think it applies to those crazy young people we see now spending 95% of their time in front of a screen. What indeed is this world coming to? But I digress. More appropriate for today's talk is this. There is in the soul a taste for the good, just as there is in the body an appetite for enjoyment. While I'm sure that some part of my soul has a taste for the good, that party is usually overwhelmed by my body's appetite for enjoyment, especially for the enjoyment of chocolate. My family knows that they can trust me with their money, their secrets, and their cars, but not with their chocolate. Sometimes my craving for chocolate is so profound that I feel like I'm going to die if I can't have it. And for many years, I thought that no one would die from an unsatisfied craving, but then I read this poem. This is Little Abigail and the Beautiful Pony by Shel Silverstein. There was a girl named Abigail who was taking a drive through the country with her parents, and when she spotted a beautiful, sad-eyed gray and white pony, and next to it was a sign that said, "For sale, cheap." "Oh," said Abigail, "may I have that pony?" And her parents said, "No, you may not." And Abigail said, "But I must have that pony." And her parents said, "Well, you can have a nice butter pecan ice cream cone when we get home." And Abigail said, "I don't want a butter pecan ice cream cone. I want that pony. I must have that pony." And her parents said, "Be quiet. Stop nagging. You are not getting that pony." And Abigail began to cry and said, "If I don't get that pony, I'll die." And her parents said, "You won't die. No child ever died yet from not getting a pony." And Abigail felt so bad that when she got home, she went to bed. And she couldn't eat, and she couldn't sleep, and her heart was broken, and she did die. all because of a pony that her parents would not buy.
So here is the secret to self-control. The secret to self-control is to give up control.
Words. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, what you just saw was a bit of a TED Talk, TEDx Talk, actually. TEDx Talks are independently produced TED Talks. This one was presented in Rainier, Washington in 2014, and this talk is by Jonathan Bricker, who is a leader in what is called acceptance and commitment therapy, which in Bricker's case, he primarily uses it for smoking cessation therapy. The entire TED Talk is quite compelling, and I encourage you to view it, but we'll just look at the last couple of minutes. Okay.
So here is the secret to self-control. The secret to self-control is to give up control. Because otherwise, we get into a tug of war with a monster, a craving monster. And the craving monster says, come on, smoke a cigarette. Come on, have that cookie. Come on. And you're on the other side saying, no, craving monster, I'm going to distract myself from you. I'm going to ignore you. No, 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 no. And craving monster says, no, no, come on, you know you want it. And you're just back here, and you're going back and forth, and pretty soon the craving monster overpowers you. You have that cookie, you have that cigarette, until the craving monster comes back. And then you're in the tug of war again, doing what we've learned how to do. Unless you drop the rope. And what you discover is if you just allow the monster to occupy a space in your body, you discover in a few minutes that the craving monster is not as threatening as he appears. And sometimes he even goes away. As we break for lunch, we're going to have choices of what to eat. When you see them, try to be aware of the cravings in your body. Try to be willing to have those cravings, see if they pass on their own. And whatever choice you make, try to bring a spirit of caring and kindness to yourself. For that is the mountain that we are all climbing. Thank you very much.
Today's reading is from Michael Pollan's book, This Is Your Mind on Plants, Opium, Caffeine, Mescaline, which is just out. Writing about caffeine, he says, something like 90% of humans ingest caffeine regularly, making it the most widely used psychoactive drug in the world. And this is the only one we routinely give to children, commonly in the form of fizzy drinks. Few of us even think of it as a drug, much less our daily use of it as an addiction. He describes his experience in giving up coffee cold turkey for 3 months. The fog settled over me and would not budge. It's not that I felt terrible. I never got a serious headache, but all day long I felt a certain muzziness, as if a veil had descended in the space between me and reality, a kind of filter that absorbed certain wavelengths of light and sound. I was able to do some work, but distractedly. I feel like an unsharpened pencil, I wrote in my notebook. Things on the periphery intrude and won't be ignored. I can't focus for more than a minute. But then he says, over the course of the next few days, I began to feel better. The veil lifted, yet I was still not quite myself, and neither quite was the world. In this new normal, the world seemed duller to me. I seemed duller too. And at the end of his 3-month experiment, he goes on. I had thought long and hard about what kind of coffee I would get and where. I opted for a special, my local coffee shop's term for what's more commonly known as a flat white. My special was unbelievably good, a ringing reminder of what a poor counterfeit decaf is. Here were the whole dimensions and depths of flavor that I had completely forgotten about. Everything in my visual field seemed pleasantly italicized, filmic, and I wondered if all these people with their cardboard sleeve swallowed cups had any idea what a powerful drug they were sipping. But how could they? They had long ago become habituated to caffeine and were now using it for another purpose entirely. Baseline maintenance, that is, plus a welcome little lift. I felt lucky that this more powerful experience was available to me. This, along with the stellar sleeps, was the wonderful dividend of my investment in abstention. And yet, in a few days, I would be them, caffeine tolerant and addicted all over again. I wondered, was there any way to preserve the power of this drug? Could I devise a new relationship with caffeine? Maybe treat it more like a psychedelic, say something to be taken only on occasion and with a greater degree of ceremony and intention. Maybe just drink coffee on Saturdays, just the one. And when I got home, I tackled my to-do list with unaccustomed fervor, harnessing the surge of energy, of focus, coursing through me, and I put it to good use. I compulsively cleared and decluttered on the computer, in my closet, in the garden, and in the shed. I raked, I weeded, I put things in order as if I were possessed. Whatever I focused on zealously and single-mindedly. Around noon, my compulsiveness began to subside, and I felt ready for a change of scene. I had yanked a few plants out of the vegetable garden that were not pulling their weight, and decided to go to the garden center to buy some replacements. It was during the drive that I realized the true reason I was heading to this particular garden center. It had this Airstream trailer parked out front that served really good espresso.
When I began to put the title and summary for this service together, and I'm sure it was after the deadline and I was in a hurry, I had a hard time choosing the right word for the title. I initially thought I would call it addiction, but I thought that maybe some people might stay away, that they didn't consider themselves addicts, not even to coffee, as Michael Pollan suggested in the reading. So hence, craving. I don't seem to be alone in avoiding the word addiction. When I recall the services I attended when I first joined a Unitarian Universalist church back in the 1980s, topics like alcoholism and addiction never came up. Talking about substance abuse and addiction just didn't happen in UU circles back then. We would sometimes talk about those things as social problems, as problems that other people had, but not as personal problems that we or people we knew had. Now, that's not to say our UU congregations didn't sponsor 12-step groups, but those tended to be directed towards those other people, not us. In our congregations, we pretended that issues with addiction didn't exist. Now, this began to change when Unitarian Universalist minister Dennis Meacham published the Addiction Ministry Handbook around 2004. This is partly autobiographical, which noted his journey as a recovering alcoholic. This book really brought a sea change, and we began to talk about addiction. And many UU churches started AA, NA programs, as well as others. And these programs have been life-saving for many people. Some have told me this themselves. But still, there was this resistance to traditional recovery programs like AA for many of our people. I think the distancing many of us had for such programs is multifold. Certainly and most obviously, AA has at least some theistic component. The third step says, we made our decision to turn our lives over to God as we understood Him. And I think for many UUs, this was a non-starter. Even many theistic UUs, the portrayal that God is a guy that we could hand our lives over to could be a challenge. Now, there are non-theistic variations of 12-step programs, like rational recovery. But many of us resist even these non-theistic variations. I think that's because there's a fundamental problem with the core concept of all of these programs. They ask us to give up control, to admit that we have no control over our lives. It's a sense that we have to hit bottom. To be a little bit more pointed, many of these programs emerged out of a Protestant, I would say even a Calvinist sensibility, that we at least, or the addicts among us, are all sinners before an angry God, that we have to repent, admit our failings, and strive for the perfection of total abstinence. To quote a UU minister, a colleague of mine, Sam Trembore, he says, the fundamental goal of the 12-step process is experiencing a religious conversion through the grace of a higher power. It is the conversion experience which removes the compulsion to drink. From the beginning, the higher power has been broadly defined, but it basically means a source outside of oneself which can be relied upon to help one stay sober. End of quote. And again, this may work for many people, but I know it doesn't work for others. I was one of the others. So I've been a rather heavy drinker for a long time. I started in high school. The Boy Scouts was a good training ground where pizza and beer at a local Pizza Hut was a good end to many of our activities and scouting events. Later in my work world, surrounded by customers and salespeople, was full of drink. And then when I made a career change into ministry, I found that ministers' gatherings, at least until recent times, were legendary in the drinking. Alcohol helped my wife and I process our lives. It helped me in difficult social occasions like family reunions or weddings, at least weddings where I wasn't officiating. But I did notice that during the pandemic, my drinking was getting out of control. I think I might not be the only one there. It was easy to spend those isolated evenings with wine or margaritas. When the government briefly banned alcohol early in the pandemic, I panicked. I ordered a significant supply of tequila and Controy and had it shipped through Amazon Mexico. Amazon Mexico, which delivered it to our door, my door, no signature required. I wondered about how to dial back, but I didn't feel that the 12-step approach was right for me. I didn't feel I'd reached bottom. My ego wasn't ready to go, to let go and let God. And I wondered if maybe there was a middle way. So about 6 months ago, I encountered a podcast by Annie Grace that helped me shift my relationship with alcohol. I should say a little bit about Annie Grace's approach, which she describes in her book, This Naked Mind. She realized that alcohol was too wrapped up in her own life, and while she wanted to break free, she didn't want to do it in a way that would lead to a struggle for sobriety, living with a constant craving for drink, even while abstaining. So she developed a way of examining the science, the patterns, and the social aspects of the habit of drinking alcohol, and deeply reflecting on drinking in total. So I read her book, as she suggested, slowly, chapter by chapter. I took time in the reflections she called liminal points, which invited me to examine my beliefs about alcohol. Mind you, this was not so much a rational activity as it was there was some scientific and medical content in the book, certainly, but it was primarily an experiential activity, what was happening within me. At least that was my own experience. One very powerful experience was simply using my observational powers to understand my own experience with drink. The craving, yes, about 5 o'clock every evening, which then with the first drink, that experience, that rush, that euphoria that maybe lasted for 15 minutes or so, followed by that sluggish kind of downtime for a couple hours, which, of course, an emptiness that we could only fix with another drink. I stepped back and experienced this. I really noticed it, as well as other aspects of my drinking life. This is the core concept of the book, This Naked Mind, to strip away all of the cultural conditioning and just face the experience directly. Now, Grace has quit alcohol completely, and many of her followers have done so also. But she doesn't lead with that idea, and she doesn't consider people who have not completely quit as failures. I am one of those people. I am not a failure. I have not given up alcohol, but I have dialed it way back. It's no longer something I crave every night. I continue to pay attention to the experience to try to balance the positive and negative aspects of alcohol for me. And then there's food. To talk about food as a substance that we can crave, abuse, and be addicted to brings up complicated things. I mean, it is the one substance we cannot abstain from completely. We have to have it nearly every day. And yet the intensity of cultural and personal rules around food is astonishing. We live in a culture where capitalism drives what we eat, and the cultural messages are different for women than men, so I can only speak from my own male identity. Like many guys, I didn't pay much attention to food and weight, and by my mid-30s, I was approaching 200 pounds. I am quite grateful that a supervisor I had at the time invited me and another coworker out to the gym 2 or 3 days a week at lunchtime. This broke our usual practice of going out to a restaurant or fast food meals every single day. I continued that workout pattern after I left the job, and I gradually began to pay more attention to what I ate. In my 50s, I became vegetarian, or more precisely, a pescatarian, since I will occasionally eat fish. Actually, I'm kind of a bad vegetarian, and because I try not to make a big deal of it. You know, if somebody serves me meat, I'll eat it. And also, if I, make a mistake ordering something that happens to have meat in it, I'll eat that too. And that's really easy to do here in Mexico. It happened to me last week. The result of the food and exercise practice is that I've lost over 30 pounds over the last couple decades. A slow pace, yes, but I didn't really try hard, which is probably easier for guys. Especially guys who have access to good exercise options like I do here in Lake Chapala. Recently, I encountered a powerful approach to food which was surprisingly parallel to my own food experience. This is called intuitive eating by Evelyn Treble and Elise Roche. These two dietitians, and yes, that was their training, take a very anti-diet approach to food. Instead of diets, they have us focus on paying attention to our own bodies, specifically how they feel during and after we consume food. So, to give an example of this noticing, this paying attention for me, one of my favorite foods has been a good chocolate malt shake. Extra malt, please. I remember getting these things when I was in high school. When I worked at the grocery store, I would go to the lunch counter next door and have a burger and shake on my break. And they'd make the best chocolate malts. It was kind of a reward for nearing the end of my shift. So today, every now and then, I crave a chocolate malt, and I cave into the craving. But I pay attention to the flavor, and I've come to pay attention to the effect it has on my stomach. That kind of discomfort these things bring now, that this kind of heaviness. So maybe once or twice a year thing this is now, and it's a mixed blessing. I don't crave them in quite the same way. It's more of a curiosity. Another big point of intuitive eating is that all foods are allowed, that it's not good for us to forbid ourselves from certain foods, for that will only drive more intense craving. I've noticed that in my own journey, it's much easier for me to tell myself, well, I might have some of that later, than to tell myself it's a food I cannot have. Another point of intuitive eating is the idea that we ought to respect our bodies, whatever size or form they come in. Body size says little about health, and our culture focuses way too much on body shape, weight, and shaming. Now, this has been a bit of a journey for me, for just as being a white person, I have invisible privilege that I have to work to see. I also have to work to see the invisible privilege I receive as a reasonably fit-looking person. And I've had to pay attention to that privilege as well. I recognize, too, that many of our attitudes about food and weight and diet come from our childhoods. And my childhood was no different. My parents struggled with obesity, and there was a bit of shame about that. There are few family pictures of them from that time, for example. Those body attitudes get ingrained. They run deep, and it is very hard work to untwine them from our lives. So this is my story about dealing with cravings or addictions, if the word fits. It's just my journey, and I hope it's been useful to share. My conclusion about cravings and addictions is paradoxical. First, I reiterate for those with deep physical addictions, it's better not to go it alone, but to get help on the journey. Whether this is 12-step or therapy, residential care or ketamine, my advice would be to try various things, find out what works for you. But for those of us who muddle through our lives, living with cravings, tendencies, whatever, for chocolate, smokes, coffee, beer or donuts, or ponies for that matter, there is paradox. To quote Jonathan Bricker in the video, we can fight our monsters, our dragons, or we can learn to embrace them. We embrace these monsters by getting to know them, investigating, observing them. We don't fight them by making them bad or wrong or shameful. And in knowing them, we have a greater choice in how we act on cravings and desires. And then gradually, just gradually, we can allow our cravings to take their place as normal parts of the richness and complexity that makes us human. Blessed be. So our hymn is Spirit of Life by Carolyn McDade. Now this one is a little different today. For whatever reason, Linda was not able to join us singing. So we all have to sing ourselves. And I know this is really, really hard. We have gone, 15, 18 months without singing. Probably most of us haven't sung even alone. But now we get a chance to sing together. And I hope that we will sing lustily, strongly, well, and off-key as we like. Some of us call that harmonization, and it happens naturally. But let us sing a song that probably virtually all of us know from some point or another in our Unitarian Universalist life, Spirit of Life.
This is the time in our service when we ask that you remember that we share our gifts here through pledging and donations. Instructions for payments to the fellowship are on a slide during the announcements before the service every week. And while you are considering your gifts to the fellowship, remember that each month LCUUF donates 5,000 pesos or more to an organization providing food aid in our lakeside community. For the month of July, we've been supporting Operation Feed, which provides food assistance in San Juan Cosala. When you pay your pledge, please add something for Share the Basket, as you used to place pesos in our regular basket. You can donate in the same way that you pay your pledge, but please donate Share the Basket separately or indicate what part of your donation is for Share the Basket. Your offerings are greatly received. Let us extinguish our chalices with these words which we read together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we keep in our hearts and share with all the world.
Our cravings may be monsters, dragons, but they can be friendly dragons. If we choose to, we can get to know them, to embrace them, learn to live with them, see what they have to teach us, so that perhaps our cravings are an invitation by life to be more fully alive. Go in peace now.